3 grave robbers thought they struck gold, literally, when they opened a coffin in the desert. But they didn't find a corpse. They found a breathing outlaw with a score to settle and a list of names to cross off. Stay to the end to witness how death couldn't stop him, and why his revenge was just getting started. Silas, the self-proclaimed leader, adjusted his spectacles, the moonlight glinting off the lenses as he nervously consulted the tattered map. He was a planner, a worrier, the kind of man who triple-checked his shoelaces before leaving the house. Ruth, a woman built like an oak tree, leaned against her shovel, her gaze fixed on the horizon, ever watchful. Muscle, pure and simple, she was the one who could dig all night without breaking a sweat. Finn, barely out of his teens, bounced on the balls of his feet, excitement bubbling within him. This was his first big score, his chance to prove himself. "Are you sure this is the place, Silas?" Ruth's voice was a low rumble. "The map doesn't lie," Silas insisted, adjusting his spectacles again. "Bloody Bill Carson. They say he buried his loot with him, too much to carry when he kicked it." Finn whistled. "Imagine how much gold is down there." Silas shivered, not from excitement, but from a deep-seated fear. "Let's just get this over with." The air hung heavy with anticipation and the scent of damp earth. Little did they know they were about to unearth more than just gold and bones. They were about to unleash a storm of vengeance. The air crackled with unspoken tension. They had all heard the stories, the legends whispered around campfires. Bloody Bill Carson wasn't just an outlaw, he was a boogeyman, a figure of nightmares. Stories of his ruthlessness, his quick draw, and his insatiable greed. It was said he robbed stagecoaches blind, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. "They say he killed a man just for snoring too loud," Finn offered, his voice a little too high-pitched. Ruth snorted. "Those are just stories to scare kids." But even she couldn't completely hide the unease in her eyes. Silas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "The point is," he said, trying to sound authoritative, he was careful. He wouldn't have trusted anyone with his gold. That's why he took it with him. "But what if the stories are true?" Finn persisted. "What if his ghost is guarding the loot?" Ruth rolled her eyes, but Silas hesitated. What if they were disturbing something best left undisturbed? The promise of gold warred with the primal fear that gripped him. He pushed the thought aside. They were in too deep to turn back now. The digging began. Ruth's shovel bit into the earth with practiced ease, each scoop a testament to her strength. Silas, despite his nervousness, diligently cleared away the loose soil, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finn, fueled by adrenaline, worked with surprising energy, eager to prove his worth. The hole deepened, the air growing colder and damper. The scent of earth intensified, mixed with a faint, musty odor that made Silas's stomach churn. Hours passed, marked only by the rhythmic clang of the shovel and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Finally, Ruth's shovel struck something solid. A dull thud reverberated through the night. They exchanged glances, a mixture of excitement and apprehension in their eyes. "That's it," Ruth breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "The coffin." Silas dropped to his knees, brushing away the remaining soil with trembling hands. There it was. A crude wooden box, its surface weathered and cracked with age. It was larger than he expected, heavy and imposing. A sense of dread washed over him. This was it. There was no turning back now. He beckoned Finn to help, and together they strained to lift the heavy lid. With a final heave, the lid creaked open, revealing the dark interior. The stench that wafted out was overpowering, a mix of decay, damp earth, and something else, something acrid and metallic that made Finn gag. Silas held his lantern higher, its flickering light dancing across the scene. At first, they saw only tattered clothes and the faint outline of a skeletal figure. Then a hand, gnarled and pale, shot out, grabbing the edge of the coffin. A guttural groan echoed through the night. Silas yelped and stumbled backward, dropping the lantern. It landed in the dirt, casting wild, distorted shadows. Ruth cursed and drew her pistol. Finn stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror. Then slowly, impossibly, the figure in the coffin began to sit up. It wasn't a skeleton. It was a man. A man with matted hair, a ragged beard, and eyes that burned with a cold, furious light. A bullet hole marred his forehead, but he was alive, or at least undead. "Bloody Bill Carson," Ruth whispered, her voice trembling despite herself. Carson fixed his gaze on them, his lips peeling back in a gruesome grin. "You shouldn't have disturbed my sleep." Ruth kept her pistol trained on Carson, her hand steady despite the shock. Silas, still scrambling backward, tripped over a root and landed hard. Finn remained transfixed, his youthful bravado completely shattered. "Who are you?" Ruth demanded, her voice regaining its usual steel. "And what do you want?" Carson slowly climbed out of the coffin, his movements stiff and labored. He swayed slightly, his eyes never leaving them. "I want what's mine," he rasped, his voice like gravel, "and I want revenge." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "My own gang, they shot me, left me for dead. Buried me alive with the gold they stole." A flicker of pain crossed his face, quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "They thought they were rid of me, they were wrong." He looked at each of them in turn, assessing them. "You three, you disturbed my rest. Now you're going to help me get what I deserve." Silas, finally finding his voice, stammered, "Why would we do that?" Carson grinned, a truly terrifying sight. "Because if you don't, you'll end up just like them." He paused, "Plus, I know where the rest of the gold is hidden." A tense silence hung in the air. Silas, still on the ground, was the first to speak. "We could just leave," he squeaked. "Forget we ever saw anything." He looked pleadingly at Ruth, hoping for support. Ruth lowered her pistol slightly, but her eyes remained fixed on Carson. "And what's stopping you from shooting us in the back the second we turn around?" Finn, recovering some of his courage, spoke up. "What kind of share are we talking about?" The lure of gold, it seemed, was stronger than his fear. Carson chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "A generous one, enough to make you all very rich, but only if you prove yourselves useful." He gestured towards the east. "The first one lives in a town called Redemption. Goes by the name of Preacher now. Find him, bring him to me, alive." Ruth considered the offer, her mind calculating the risks and rewards. "And if we do this, you swear you'll give us our share and let us walk away?" Carson's eyes glinted in the darkness. "I swear," he said, but something in his tone suggested his word wasn't worth much. The deal was struck, a pact made in the shadow of a grave, bound by greed and the promise of vengeance. They were now all in it together, whether they liked it or not. As they rode towards redemption, Carson, his voice a low growl, recounted the events that led to his burial. It was a tale of greed and treachery, a stark reminder of the ruthless world they now inhabited. Flashback. Dust swirled around the exhausted gang as they huddled around a campfire, the largest haul of their careers secured. Gold gleamed under the flickering flames, enough to set them all up for life, but greed had already taken root. "We should split it evenly," Carson had declared, unaware of the daggers hidden in the shadows. "Why evenly?" a voice sneered. It was Jeb, Carson's second-in-command, his eyes narrowed with ambition. "You've always taken the biggest cut." A shot rang out, the bullet tearing through Carson's shoulder. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled for cover, loyalty dissolving into a desperate scramble for gold. Carson, wounded and betrayed, fought back with animalistic fury, but he was outnumbered. Another shot, this time to the head. He crumpled to the ground, the world fading to black. He remembered the suffocating darkness, the feeling of earth being shoveled onto his face, the crushing weight of the coffin lid. He had clawed and screamed, but no one heard him. Lend flashback. Carson's voice broke the silence. "They left me to rot. Now they'll pay." The image of his betrayal burned in his eyes, a constant fuel for his vengeance. Redemption seemed like any other dusty town, but beneath the surface, secrets simmered. They found Preacher tending a small church, his face lined with age and regret. He looked nothing like the ruthless outlaw Carson described. Silas, trying to maintain a facade of civility, approached him. "We're looking for a man named Jebediah," he said. "Goes by preacher now." The man's eyes flickered with recognition, then settled into a weary acceptance. "I am Jebediah," he admitted. "What do you want?" Before Silas could answer, Carson stepped forward, his presence radiating menace. "I want what you took from me," he snarled. Jebediah's face paled. He tried to speak, to plead, but Carson silenced him with a swift, brutal motion. A knife flashed and Jebediah crumpled to the ground, a crimson stain spreading across his chest. It was over in seconds. Silas stared in horror. Ruth remained impassive, her expression unreadable. Finn, however, seemed almost impressed by Carson's cold efficiency. They had their first taste of Carson's brand of justice, and it was bloody. "That's one," Carson said, wiping the blade clean. "Now for the rest." The ride to the next target was fraught with unspoken tension. Silas, haunted by the image of Jebediah's lifeless eyes, kept his distance from Carson, his hands trembling. He started questioning their agreement, the gold seeming less appealing with each passing mile. Finn, on the other hand, seemed almost invigorated by the violence. He peppered Carson with questions about his past exploits, eager to learn from the legendary outlaw. He saw Carson as a strong, decisive leader, someone to be admired. Ruth remained a cipher, her focus unwavering. She cared little for Carson's motivations or Silas's moral qualms. For her, it was about the gold. She kept her eyes on the prize, willing to do whatever it took to secure her share. As they rode, the seeds of discord were sown. The shared goal of wealth was no longer enough to unite them. Fear, admiration, and cold pragmatism were pulling them in different directions, threatening to tear the group apart before Carson could exact his revenge. The shifting sands of loyalty had begun to swirl. That night, huddled around a meager campfire, the simmering tensions finally boiled over. Silas, unable to contain his guilt any longer, confronted Carson. "What we're doing is wrong," he declared, his voice trembling. "These men might have changed. They might deserve a chance." Carson scoffed. "A chance? They gave me a chance to die," he spat into the fire. "They deserve nothing but the same fate they dealt me." "But we're not murderers," Silas protested, looking at Ruth and Finn for support. Ruth shrugged. "We're grave robbers, Silas. Morality went out the window a long time ago." Finn, emboldened by Carson's presence, added, "He's right, Silas. These guys are criminals. They deserve what's coming to them." "And what about us?" Silas pleaded. "Are we going to become monsters too?" Carson rose to his feet, his shadow looming over Silas. "You made a deal," he growled. "Now you're going to honor it or face the consequences." The argument ended there, unresolved. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced like demons, reflecting the darkness that had consumed them all. The divide was clear, Silas against the world, with Ruth and Finn wavering in the balance. The next target, a man named Lucky Lou, owned a lavish gambling den in a lawless town. Unlike Jebediah, Lou was prepared. Hired guns patrolled the premises, their eyes scanning for trouble. Getting to Lou wouldn't be easy. Carson, ever pragmatic, devised a plan. Ruth would create a distraction at the front, drawing the guards' attention. Finn would sneak around the back, providing cover fire. Silas, reluctantly, would stay with Carson, offering support. The plan went awry almost immediately. Ruth's distraction worked too well, escalating into a full-blown shootout. Bullets flew, shattering glass and splintering wood. Finn, caught in the crossfire, struggled to maintain his position. Carson, a whirlwind of deadly precision, moved through the chaos, his gun blazing. Silas, terrified, huddled behind him, firing blindly. Despite his fear, he managed to take down one of Lou's men, surprising himself. The shootout was brutal and bloody. Several men fell on both sides. Finally, Carson cornered Lou, who begged for his life. Carson showed no mercy. He shot Lou dead, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. The ordeal tested their skills, their courage, and their loyalty to Carson. It left Silas shaken, Finn exhilarated, and Ruth indifferent, but it solidified their bond, however fractured. The relentless violence and Carson's unwavering thirst for revenge finally pushed Silas over the edge. He couldn't take it anymore. Under the cover of darkness, he crept towards the horses, where the remaining gold from Carson's coffin was stashed. He planned to take it and run, leaving Carson and the others to their bloody fate. But Ruth was watching. She had suspected Silas's wavering resolve and had been keeping a close eye on him. As Silas reached for the gold, Ruth emerged from the shadows, her pistol drawn. "Where do you think you're going, Silas?" she asked, her voice cold and hard. Silas stammered, I can't do this anymore, Ruth. It's too much. We're going to get killed." "We made a deal," Ruth reminded him. "And I intend to see it through." Silas pleaded with her, trying to convince her to abandon Carson, but Ruth was unmoved. She was focused on the gold, and she wouldn't let anything or anyone stand in her way. With a sigh, she disarmed Silas and dragged him back to the campfire, his hopes of escape dashed. Ruth, despite her silence, was the only thing keeping the group together, for now. After dealing with Silas's failed betrayal, Carson decided it was time to reveal the location of the main stash of gold. He knew that with only one target left, their loyalty might waver further. The promise of a vast fortune, he hoped, would keep them in line. "There's more gold," he announced, his voice drawing their attention. "Much more." He explained that after years of robbing and pillaging, he had amassed a fortune far exceeding what they had found in his coffin. He had hidden it in a secret cave, accessible only through a treacherous mountain pass. He was the only one who knew the way. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Ruth asked, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I needed to know I could trust you," Carson replied, his gaze unwavering. "Now the final member of my gang awaits. Jebediah and Lou were small-timers compared to him. He's become powerful since he left me. And he has taken the rest of my fortune." "Who is it?" Finn asked, his excitement palpable. "His name is Jericho," Carson said, his voice filled with venom, "and he's waiting for us in the mountains." The prospect of untold riches and a final, bloody confrontation hung heavy in the air, driving them onward towards their ultimate destination. The cave of gold was within reach, but so was Jericho. The mountain pass was treacherous, a narrow path clinging to the side of a sheer cliff. One wrong step meant certain death. Carson, despite his weakened state, navigated the path with an unnerving familiarity. Finally, they reached the cave entrance, hidden behind a waterfall. Inside, the air was cold and damp, the silence broken only by the dripping of water. As they ventured deeper, the cave opened into a vast cavern, illuminated by torches. And there, surrounded by armed guards and piles of gold, stood Jericho. He was no longer the scrawny outlaw Carson remembered. He was dressed in fine clothes, his face hardened by years of power and wealth. "Well, well, well," Jericho said, his voice smooth and menacing. "If it isn't Bloody Bill Carson, I thought we'd seen the last of you." Carson stepped forward, his eyes burning with hatred. "You thought wrong, Jericho. I'm here to collect what's mine." Jericho chuckled. "Everything I have is mine, Bill. You should have stayed dead." He gestured to his guards. "Kill them all." The final confrontation had begun. Gold glittered, promises broken. As Jericho's guards opened fire, Ruth and Finn returned fire, creating a chaotic distraction. Silas, paralyzed by fear, could only watch as Carson charged towards Jericho, a man possessed. "This is between you and me, Jericho," Carson roared, shoving aside the guards that tried to intervene. Jericho, surprisingly agile for a man of his stature, drew a hidden knife and met Carson's charge. The two men clashed, their movements a blur of steel and fury. Years of hatred and resentment fueled their every strike. Carson, despite his weakened state, fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal. He dodged Jericho's attacks, his eyes burning with a cold, unwavering focus. Jericho, confident in his wealth and power, was caught off guard by Carson's relentless assault. The fight was brutal and unforgiving. Both men were wounded, their clothes torn and bloodied. Finally, Carson managed to disarm Jericho, knocking the knife from his grasp. He grabbed Jericho by the throat, his grip tightening with each passing second. Jericho gasped for air, his face turning purple. "Any last words?" Carson snarled, his voice filled with venom. Jericho, his eyes wide with terror, could only choke out a single word: gold. Carson's face contorted with rage. It was never about the gold. He tightened his grip, and with a final, desperate struggle, Jericho's life was extinguished. Carson had his revenge, but the gold was still there, waiting. For whom? The remaining guards, stunned by Jericho's death, surrendered. Ruth and Finn, their faces grim, approached Carson, expecting to finally claim their reward. Silas remained huddled against the wall, still shaken by the violence. "Well, Carson," Ruth said, her voice flat. "We held up our end of the bargain. Where's our share?" Carson looked at them, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Your share," he chuckled. "You think this was about the gold." He gestured around the cavern at the piles of glittering coins and jewels. This was just bait, a way to lure my betrayers out of hiding." Ruth and Finn stared at him, their faces a mixture of disbelief and anger. "What are you talking about?" Finn demanded. "You three," Carson said, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You were just pawns in my game. I knew Jericho would come for the gold. All I needed was a way to draw him out. And you, with your greed and desperation, were perfect for the job." He paused, savoring their shock and confusion. "Revenge," he whispered. "That's all I ever wanted, and now I have it." The gold, it seemed, was worthless to him. He had used them all, but there was one more surprise left. Before Finn could react, Ruth raised her pistol. The shot rang out, echoing through the cavern. Carson staggered backward, a look of shock and disbelief on his face. He clutched at his chest, his eyes fixed on Ruth. "Why?" he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Ruth's face was devoid of emotion. "It was never about the gold for me either, Carson." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "My name isn't Ruth, it's Carson, Ruth Carson." A collective gasp filled the cavern. Even Silas, still huddled against the wall, looked up in astonishment. Carson stammered. "Your daughter," Ruth finished, her voice cold and hard. "You left my mother when I was just a baby. Abandoned us to a life of poverty and hardship. I've been waiting for this day for a long time." She stepped closer, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and pain. "You may have gotten your revenge on your gang, but I got mine too. You were so consumed by your own anger, you never saw me coming." Carson crumpled to the ground, his lifeblood staining the cavern floor. Ruth had played them all, using Carson's quest for vengeance to achieve her own. The gold was now hers, and the truth finally revealed. The cavern fell silent, the only sound the dripping of water and the ragged breathing of Finn and Silas. They stared at Ruth, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. Everything they thought they knew had been turned upside down. What do we do now?" Finn stammered, his voice barely audible. Silas, still trembling, looked at the piles of gold surrounding them. "It's all for nothing," he whispered. "All this death for nothing." Ruth ignored them, calmly collecting a portion of the gold. She had achieved her goal, and now she was leaving. "The rest is yours," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Do what you want with it." She turned and walked towards the cave entrance, disappearing into the darkness. Finn and Silas were left alone, facing each other across the cavern floor, surrounded by the spoils of a bloody revenge. Their partnership had been irrevocably changed. The shared experience had forged a bond, but it was one built on lies, violence, and betrayal. Could they ever trust each other again? Would they even want to? The choice was theirs. Leave the gold and walk away from the nightmare, or embrace their newfound wealth and begin a new, uncertain journey. Either option was now open to them. Outside the cave, as dawn broke over the mountains, Ruth mounted her horse, the saddlebags heavy with gold. She looked back at the cave entrance, a flicker of something that might have been regret crossing her face. But the moment passed and her expression hardened once more. She spurred her horse forward, riding away from the cave, away from the death and betrayal, towards an uncertain future. The gold would give her a fresh start, a chance to build a new life free from the shadow of her father's legacy. Behind her, Finn and Silas remained in the cavern, their fate hanging in the balance. They could choose to embrace the darkness that had consumed them, becoming wealthy outlaws, forever haunted by their past. Or they could leave the gold behind, seeking redemption and a chance to reclaim their souls. The choice, as always, was theirs. As Ruth rode into the sunrise, the final twist of fate was revealed. In the end, everyone got what they wanted, even if it wasn't what they expected. Vengeance, gold, and a fresh start were each obtained, leaving Finn and Silas with their choice. The mountains stood silent, guarding the secrets of the cave, and the legend of Bloody Bill Carson and his daughter would live on.